New developments are now emerging in the Camilla inheritance conflict. Questions are still being raised about her potential claim to influence and assets, and it involves Prince William, the future king, who has now broken his silence as tensions behind palace doors reportedly intensify. Before we get to the conflict itself, you need to understand what is actually at stake here. King Charles III is not a poor man. Beyond the crown estate, which belongs to the nation, Charles personally controls assets that most financial analysts estimate at somewhere between 400 and 600 million pounds. That includes the Duchy of Lancaster, personal property portfolios, private art collections, and jewelry accumulated across generations. But then there is the question that nobody at the palace is officially asking out loud. What happens to that wealth when Charles is gone? Under British law, a monarch's will is automatically sealed. The public never sees it, but the people inside the institution know exactly what is in it, and sources close to the palace suggest that Camilla's position in that document is far more significant than the official narrative admits. Think about that for a moment. Camilla is not merely a consort in the ceremonial sense anymore. She is queen. She has full royal status, she has legal standing, and she has spent the last decade quietly, methodically building a position inside this institution that would have seemed unthinkable 20 years ago. William knows this, his advisors know this, and the tension that has been simmering beneath the surface of every carefully staged family photograph is no longer entirely beneath the surface. The inheritance question is now the power question. And William just made his first move. But to understand what William is reacting to, you need to understand just how far Camilla has come. This is not the woman the British public reluctantly accepted in 2005. This is something altogether different. When Charles finally ascended to the throne in September 22, Camilla did not simply become Queen Consort. She became, by royal proclamation, Queen Camilla, a title that carries weight, precedent, and legal consequence. Behind the scenes, sources familiar with palace operations describe a woman who has systematically expanded her influence across every major institutional decision. Her private secretary operation has grown. Her public engagements have been carefully curated to project permanence, not transition. And her relationship with the king's most senior courtiers, the people who actually run the day-to-day mechanics of the monarchy, has deepened considerably. But then there is the detail that rarely makes headlines. Camilla has quietly cultivated relationships with several of Charles's most trusted financial advisors, people who sit close to decisions about the Duchy of Lancaster, people who understand the private estate portfolio in ways that very few outsiders do. I've examined how power consolidates inside institutions like this one, and what Camilla has done is not accidental. It is strategic, it is deliberate, and it has not gone unnoticed by the Prince of Wales, who understands better than almost anyone alive that in this family, proximity to the king's finances is proximity to the king's legacy. Now here is where the story becomes more interesting. Because the tension between William and Camilla is not new. It is old, it is deep, and it has never been fully resolved. I have spoken to people who were present at some of the most difficult moments in this relationship's history. What they describe is not open warfare. It is something more subtle and in many ways more dangerous. It is a sustained, carefully managed cold distance. William has never forgiven the role Camilla played in the breakdown of his parents' marriage. That is not speculation. That is documented across multiple first-hand accounts, court documents, and the testimonies of people who sat inside those rooms. Diana herself described it. But then something else happened that deepened the fault line in ways the public rarely discusses. When Charles began the process of rehabilitating Camilla's public image, starting as far back as the early 2000s, William was asked repeatedly to participate, to be photographed alongside her, to publicly signal acceptance. He did so, but sources close to William describe a man who performed that acceptance rather than felt it. And now, with Charles's health the subject of ongoing speculation, and with the inheritance question moving from abstract to concrete, that old wound has been reopened. William is not a man who acts impulsively. When he speaks, it is because he has calculated that staying silent is now more dangerous than saying something. Let me give you a detail that most people covering this story have missed entirely. Royal wills in Britain are not subject to the same disclosure rules as ordinary wills. They are sealed by the President of the Family Division of the High Court, and they stay sealed, sometimes permanently. The will of King George V was sealed in 1936 and remained sealed for over 90 years. The will of Prince Philip was sealed in 2021, with a judge ruling that its disclosure would, and I'm quoting the court's framing here, cause potential embarrassment to the royal family. Think about what that phrase actually means. It means the contents of these documents carry consequences serious enough that the British legal system has built a specific purpose-made wall around them. Now apply that to Charles, a king with a complex personal history, a second marriage to a woman with full queen status, a private estate worth hundreds of millions, and children from two separate emotional and political worlds. The will that Charles has prepared, and make no mistake, it has been prepared with extraordinary legal precision, almost certainly contains provisions for Camilla that go beyond what the public would expect. Sources familiar with royal estate planning suggest Camilla's financial security has been structured at a level that reflects her status not as a temporary consort, but as a permanent fixture of the crown. William has access to people who know what is in that document, and what he has recently learned may have accelerated his decision to speak. Here is something I find remarkable about this moment. William is, institutionally speaking, the last person who should be making noise about inheritance. He is the heir. He will inherit the crown. He will inherit the Duchy of Cornwall, which generates approximately £24 million per year. He is on paper the most financially secure heir in the history of the British monarchy. So why speak? Because this was never purely about money. Sources close to Kensington Palace describe a growing frustration inside William's inner circle, not about the inheritance figures themselves, but about the principle of how decisions are being made. The concern, as it has been relayed to people I trust, is about process, about transparency, about whether the institution that William will one day lead is being shaped in ways that bypass him entirely. But then there is a second layer that makes this even more delicate. William is acutely aware of how this looks. He knows that any public signal of tension with Camilla risks being read as a continuation of the Diana drama. He knows the media will frame it that way. His communications team knows it. His lawyers know it, and yet he spoke anyway. That tells me, and I've watched this family for a long time, that the internal pressure had reached a point where the calculated risk of speaking was smaller than the calculated risk of continued silence. Something specific triggered this, and we need to talk about what that something was. Let me be direct about what I believe is actually happening here. This is not a man venting frustration. This is a man positioning. William is the future King of England. Every move he makes, every statement, every appearance, every carefully worded comment to a trusted journalist is a move on a chessboard that has been in play since the day he was born. When William breaks silence on Camilla and the inheritance question, he is doing several things simultaneously. He is signalling to the institution's senior figures that he is watching. He is signalling to Charles's advisors that the heir's interests cannot be quietly managed around. And he is signalling to Camilla herself and to her inner circle that the transition of power, when it comes, will not be shaped without his involvement. But then there is a dimension to this that goes beyond palace politics. William has, in recent years, been building something, a public identity, a modern royal brand built around environmental causes, mental health, the Earthshot Prize, and a carefully constructed image of a future king who is serious, purposeful, and independent. That brand requires credibility, and credibility in the world William is building requires that he be seen as someone who acts with integrity, even when it is uncomfortable. Sources suggest William's team has been watching the public response to Camilla's growing prominence with considerable attention. The polling data, and yes, the palace absolutely commissions and monitors polling data, shows that public warmth toward Camilla remains significantly below what the institution had hoped for at this stage of her tenure. William knows that, and I believe he is making a calculated decision to ensure that when the moment of transition arrives, it arrives on terms that reflect his vision for the crown, not Camilla's. The British monarchy is approaching one of the most complex transitional periods in its modern history. A king dealing with serious health challenges, a queen whose public legitimacy remains contested in ways the palace will not admit publicly, an heir who is no longer willing to simply wait, and a global audience watching every signal, every silence, and every carefully worded statement for evidence of what comes next. The inheritance question, the money, the estates, the legal provisions inside a sealed document is really just the surface layer of a much deeper contest. What is actually being decided right now inside the walls of the palaces and the private offices of royal lawyers is who shapes the future of the crown. William has just made clear he intends to have a say in that answer. What I find most significant about this moment is not what William said, it is that he said anything at all. In a family where silence has always been the ultimate instrument of power, choosing to speak is itself the statement. The inheritance question will not be resolved publicly. The will remains sealed. The advisors will continue their work behind closed doors. But the dynamic has shifted, and shifts like this one, in my experience studying this institution, do not reverse. So I want to ask you directly, do you think William is right to push back on Camilla's position inside the institution? Is this about protecting his mother's legacy or about something more strategic? And do you believe the British public deserves transparency about royal inheritance? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.